Did she work them? She working them? She working them? Okay, so she got a closet full of shoes, high heels. So, okay. Now, on behalf of the resident council here at Brush Park, Mrs. Scott, and there must be $1 million in that bag because it's heavy. Oh, it's shoes. Oh, high heel shoes. Well, if it's $1 million, it's Monopoly money. Well, take it out and show it. We want to see that. No, no, no. Yeah. Oh, oh. No, I'm fine, but I think Miss Hayes was first. Miss Hayes.
No, we're gonna switch it around.
Oh, you are? You didn't tell me that. Okay.
Hallelujah.
So you want me to do Margaret?
Right.
Okay. Um, you know, when you become a member of AARP, you have to start wearing a different set of glasses to read.
Yay, bifocals! I love them. I love my bifocals. See?
As long as you're in business. Yeah. I just want to say thank you to each of our guests, Ms. Davis, for your wonderful, we were sitting out there listening to your presentation today, and also to all of our honored guests here. And Mr. Milton, you spoke about Dr. King and some of the others, but today we really, really have two exceptional people that I want to talk a little bit about today. We're proud and we're grateful to honor Mrs. Mayor McClendon and Mrs. Rogers on this day for their leadership in achieving what most would have said would have been the impossible dream. And as you know, both ladies were featured in an article in the Detroit Free Press last year, 2011, in regards to domestic workers. The article was published because of the movie that was coming out called The Help, was due to be released. And I had the opportunity to see the movie, and at times I sat in there and you get a little angry, and then you cry, and then you laugh. And my youngest daughter, who became disabled after brain surgery 8 years ago, she went, and she has to use a wheelchair at certain times. So we walked in there with the only African American, she, her daughter, myself, and her best friend. Movie theater filled with white people. And she said, if they say anything, mother, what are you going to do? You know, we had to run out the movie with you. They had one thing to say. But I think they really enjoyed it and had an opportunity to see what these ladies went through. So like I said, a message from the movie and the book, whether we liked either, you know, both of them, we were presented with a message that was loud and clear on some of the choices these women had to make, and choices that today's women, I believe, cannot even imagine to even prepare for. I'd like to highlight some of what Mrs. McClendon did and also what Mrs. Rogers did. Mrs. McClendon, she's got paperwork in the Detroit Public Library, I understand, so if you want to read more about her, just go to the Detroit Main Library downtown. I believe her son told me and said that all her paperwork is there. But let me read a little bit about her. It's called A Milestone. On September 4th, 1969 at 3 p.m. in the Civil Rights Building at 8245 Linwood Avenue, an organization was organized for domestic workers. President and founder was Mrs. Mary A. McClendon. On July 16th through 18th, 1971, the first conference in the history of America was held in Washington, D.C. Mrs. McClendon laid the foundation for that conference. She sent a suggested proposal to the National Committee in Washington, giving her ideals and suggestions. They were unanimously accepted in 1971 and are still being used in America when and where conferences for domestic workers are held. On November 11, 1972, the first union election for domestic workers was held here in Detroit at the Michigan Department of Labor building on Woodward Avenue at Grand Boulevard, room 603. Mrs. McClendon secured enough worker signatures from Dollar Maid indicating an interest in the union, thus requiring an election to be held. The household workers lost the election, but a milestone was laid. In April 1974, Mr. Nixon signed the minimum wage bill, the first time in the history of America that domestic workers and those in related fields were given federal legislation protection. Mrs. McClendon was very instrumental in the struggle related to getting wage coverages for millions of workers that did not have this protection. She made several trips to Washington, D.C. concerning this matter. A little bit about Ms. Rogers. And I'm going to read from my newspaper because I kept all the newspapers from our president when he was first elected and that. And to me, this is just as important. So this is my newspaper. I had to dig out of my archives at home. A little about Miss Rogers. Mrs. Rogers said cleaning house suited her because she developed a fondness for cleanliness and orderliness from her mother, who couldn't stand a nasty house. Mrs. Rogers quit working for one woman because she said the woman couldn't keep the house clean even for a day. Said she cleaned the house one day and go back the next day and it looked the same. So she just said she got tired. She went on to work for another family for 16 years. Her primary assignments were cleaning the house and helping to care for two elderly women who lived there. When they went to the doctor, she'd have to watch their soap operas until they got back. Though she remained friends with the women and their families, she eventually left her employment and cleaned Thornapple Valley and later Blue Cross Blue Shield, where she retired from. She said she always took pride in her work and is grateful that it helped her raise 5 children. I like for things to be clean and organized, she said. I like everything in its place, and believe me, you should see her apartment. That comes from the way I grew up. She said her mother could smell dirt a mile away. You know, I have an older sister, and my sister did domestic work, and until this came out, I really just, you know, you said we did housework and house cleaning and that, and didn't realize what these ladies had to go through to do this. So, as I said, all I knew was she would work in New York, Pittsburgh. She would send me clothes, you know, money to buy clothes or send me clothes. And I'm young, so I'm just thinking that's great. But again, I know everyone in here, we have a story to tell about the hardships they went through. But when you look down the corridors of history, we consider that life is the greatest bargain that any one of us can have. Mrs. McClendon, Mrs. Rogers, would you please stand? And to this day, I would like to salute these two ladies. Would you give them a round of applause? And this is my gift to both of you. We know how Mr. Jackson is about these pictures. Also, ladies, from the Resident Association, Mrs. McClendon, she left her flowers.
You want over there?
No, that's all right.
No, I can bring them to you. A gift